morning, this is Pauline.
And I'm Howard.
And we're reading today from the Isle of Wight County Press for the 8th of February 2019. We start with the headlines, and the first headline. We got justice for our Rees. The horrific details of the way island man Rees PC was left for dead after being deliberately run over in the Alps have been revealed in a French courtroom. Snowboarder Rees's family say they feel vindicated after a French-Moroccan man was jailed for 12 years after being found guilty of the attempted murder of the 23-year-old in February 2017 in the resort of Chamonix. Rees was left in a coma following what was originally described as a hit and run and was left hovering between life and death. He is still suffering physically and mentally and has just had to endure a 3-day trial of the man responsible. Suzanne PC, Rees's mother, said the family were feeling mixed emotions but were pleased they could now say it was more than a hit-and-run accident. It was a deliberate attempt to kill. We spent 3 days at Annecy High Court and it was horrific, but we're delighted with the verdict. Justice has been done. They do not mess about in France and he was sentenced there and then to 12 years in prison. We have mixed feelings, anger, frustration, relief. Rees was totally innocent. He was living and working in France, enjoying his snowboarding and having a fantastic time until this happened. Rees, who had been working and snowboarding in the resort, was with friends when the man and others started hurling obscenities at the girls, and a small fight broke out. The court heard that the man drove towards the group, turning his steering wheel at speed towards them, then turned his car round to drive back over Rees. Rees of Northwood suffered terrible head injuries and has been left brain damaged. He cannot walk properly or use his right hand. Suzanne said he has to live with this for the rest of his life.
The second headline is to do with parking charges on the island. Controversial plans to charge for parking in Ryde and Newport have been put on hold by the Isle of Wight Council. The council will also freeze all parking charges across the island pending a review of all fees. The authority said money would instead be raised by an increase of up to 10% in parking permits, the first rise in 5 years, and an increase in the charge for tourist permits. An overnight charge of £1 from 6 p.m. to 8 a.m, which was in the original parking plans, will go ahead. The revised proposals will generate around £45,000 less than the original plans. The shortfall will be met through income generated by the council's commercial property portfolio. Council leader Councillor Dave Stewart said the council had revised its proposals following feedback from businesses, town and parish councils and local people, especially in Ryde and Newport. Councillor Stewart said, "The whole idea of publishing our budget proposals in November was for everyone to look at them, comment and make a case to the council on why they should or should not happen or what we could do differently. Many people did this on the issue of parking, and we've listened and made changes to our plan for the next financial year while also increasing or introducing some charges to help pay for services everyone needs. However, during this process it became clear we do need a review of how parking is charged across the island, as there is a patchwork approach to fees. There's a need for more consistency and more fairness because some towns like Newport have far more charging areas than other locations. Work will also be undertaken to improve the clarity of charging, tariffs and permits. It's estimated the new on- and off-street overnight parking charge will generate around £147,500, while increased parking permit charges could add £44,800 plus an additional £13,300 from the tourist permits rise. Chair of the Newport Business Association, John McLaughlin, said, "It's a shame they're still bringing in overnight charges, but I'm really pleased they've listened to us. We've had the chance to sit and engage with the council and they've heard us. It's a practical decision to not implement charges. We're thriving without having parking charges."
NHS staff off with anxiety. Anxiety and depression remain the main cause of staff sickness at the Isle of Wight NHS Trust. Despite work by the Trust to reduce the amount of staff sickness, the figure remains above target at 4.97%. The target for the Trust is 3.5%. Of those off sick, almost a third said it was due to anxiety and depression. The second highest reason for staff sickness was coughs, colds and flu at 13.9%. A report due to be seen by the Trust's board yesterday said part of the reason for the increase was seasonal illnesses. The number of agency and bank staff used to cover shifts has also seen an increase. Out of 3,197 full-time staff, 141 were bank staff and 107 agency. In June, the Trust said it was looking at putting in a referral system for staff with mental health concerns after the success of the physiotherapy referral service. The mental health practitioner, appointed by the Trust, received 19 new referrals in December. Managers have also been issued with a toolkit on how to support staff who are experiencing a mental health problem. The Trust has also worked to recruit internationally and made 46 job offers to nurses in January.
A man who downloaded a paedophile manual containing detailed instructions on how to sexually abuse children, including babies, has been jailed. Jamie Downing, 27, of Oakvale, Oakfield, Ryde, admitted downloading the manual as well as thousands of indecent images of children and extreme pornography involving sex with animals, and was sentenced at Isle of Wight Crown Court on Tuesday. Judge Roger Hetherington's sentencing said, "The worst offence of these, which takes this case to levels of depravity this court seldom sees, is that of the manual, which gives detailed advice on the abuse of very young children, including babies. It's hard to express in words how the public would feel about that kind of material being possessed by someone like you." After police raided Downing's address and seized computer equipment, examiners found 583 Category A images, that's the most serious, 1,087 Category B, and 1,862 Category C. They also found 65 extreme pornography images and 1,789 prohibited images of children, which are non-photographic cartoons or computer-animated images. The paedophile manual was also found, which was a slideshow presentation with instructions on how to abuse children and how to avoid being caught. Tom Horder, prosecuting, said the officers who examined the manual described the material as graphic and particularly shocking. Mr. Horder said Downing was highly IT literate and had customised his computer and organised the illegal files across 6 different hard drives. Downing told police he'd been viewing similar material since he was 16 and only now realised what he was doing was wrong and had not equated the people on his screen with real children. Helen Easterbrook, representing Downing, said the moment police knocked on her client's door, he pointed to where the material could be found and didn't try to shy away from what he'd done. "In a strange way, he's glad this has come to light," Miss Easterbrook said. "He's disgusted with himself. He's started to understand the impact on the wider community and where these images have come from." Miss Easterbrook asked Downing to be treated through rehabilitation to minimise the risk of him reoffending, but Judge Hetherington said, "I would be failing in my public duty if this case was not met with an immediate custodial sentence." Downing was jailed for a total of 12 months.
An oil rig has started drilling off the Needles. The rig, positioned between the Needles and another of Britain's most famous coastal landmarks, Old Harry Rocks, has sparked a campaign from those protesting against the drilling. The 340-foot high platform is positioned 10 miles west of the Needles. Around 6,700 tonnes of chemicals will be dumped into the sea during drilling, campaign group Save Our Shores Bournemouth has claimed. Group member Alistair Keddy said, "This entire project is reckless. It endangers our marine life, the fishing industry and tourism economy." The whale site is known as the Coulter Prospect, which was discovered in 1986. It is predicted it could yield 23 million barrels of oil. The rig will spend a month drilling in Poole Bay, Dorset, which forms part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. The oil company Corallian Energy, which holds the petroleum licence for the project, said the chemicals that will be discharged into the sea posed no risk to the environment. It said the majority of mud chemicals used during the post-drilling operations will comprise naturally occurring products, such as barite and bentonite, that are either biologically inert or readily dispersible or biodegradable, posing little or no threat to the environment. Once the drilling effluent is discharged to the sea, it will be subject to rapid dilution and dispersion.
A West Wight primary school could close due to low pupil numbers. The Isle of Wight Council will launch a consultation following a forecast decline in the number of young children living in the West Wight. There are 5 schools in the West Wight: All Saints, St Saviour's, Yarmouth Primary, Bryston Primary and Shalfleet Primary. A council spokesman said a report is being taken to Councillor Brading, Cabinet Member for Children's Services, Education and Skills, on March the 19th, seeking his permission to enter into a consultation with the schools, parents and the wider community. The report will give up-to-date information about the numbers of children living in the area and will suggest ways forward for discussion. The council didn't deny one of the outcomes could be a school closure, but said a decision would be made after the consultation process had concluded. The consultation would begin in early March and would run for 6 weeks.
A homeowner planning to build a house in his garden next to a nature reserve has been branded a garden grabber by neighbours who claim he has no rights to the land. A planning application has been lodged with the Isle of Wight Council for a 2-bedroom split-level house in Blythe Way, next to the Bats Copse and Sibden Hill Nature Reserve in Shanklin. However, neighbours said the landowner, Neil Hilson, has no rights to the land in question. A certificate of lawfulness was granted to Mr Hilson 6 years ago. He successfully demonstrated the land had been used by him as a garden for more than 12 years after he had fenced it off and claimed it as his own. Mr Hilson is now the legal owner of the land and was granted permission to use it as a domestic garden. However, objectors claim the land was left to the people of Shanklin as public open space and it is within the local nature reserve. Mr Hilson has declined to comment. Last March, an application for a 4-bedroom house on the land, also submitted by Mr Hilson, was turned down by council planners. Committee members said the proposed house was too large compared with other houses in the area and would result in overdevelopment. At the time, the Bats Copse Improvement Group said the land would encroach onto the nature reserve. Neighbour Stephanie Welch has lodged an objection to the revised scheme with the council. She said even if the land was lawfully owned, this application constitutes garden grabbing development and this contravenes national policy. She said the building would scar the landscape and would be intrusive to its surroundings. Another neighbour, Dawn Gary, who claims the new house would overlook her garden, said the land has badgers, red squirrels and foxes. We walk across the land, myself with the dog and the children coming home from school. We won't be able to do that if it's a building site. Planning agent Glenn Hepburn said Mr Hilson had lawfully claimed the land by adverse possession after fencing it off. Shanklin Town Council has not commented on the plans, as 10 councillors declared an interest in that they know Mr Hilson, a former town councillor.
Driving with cannabis in his system while already banned from the road resulted in a Shanklin man having his licence taken away for a further 3 years. Tyrone J. Clarkson of High Street was told by Island magistrates being employed as a site manager for a building firm was his saving grace and this would spare him a jail term. Instead, they gave him a 12-month custodial sentence suspended for 18 months. Clarkson, 23, admitted driving a BMW 118 in Market Hill Cows on October 28, 2018, with cannabis in his blood. He also admitted driving while disqualified and having no insurance. Anne Smout, prosecuting, said Clarkson was caught when he overtook an unmarked police car at speed. He was followed and later tested positive for cannabis. It was a month to the day he had appeared in court for an identical case and been disqualified from driving. Mrs. Smout said, "This is a repeat offence within a very short time, which is very much an aggravating feature." Oscar Vincent for Clarkson said he'd been going through a difficult time in his personal life, which had caused a very low mood, and his mental health problems were not being properly treated. He'd taken to self-medicating by using cannabis. On the day of the offences, he hadn't appreciated the drugs were still in his system. He was running late and took the foolish decision to drive. Magistrates also ordered Clarkson to pay a £115 surcharge and £85 costs.
Rent-to-buy firm to close Island branch. Newport's Bright House store is set to close, it was announced on Tuesday. The rent-to-buy firm is shutting 30 stores across the country and the Isle of Wight's branch is on the list to be axed. About 350 jobs will be lost nationwide. According to the BBC, the tough high street conditions, combined with the clampdown on rent-to-buy firms, where customers make monthly payments on a product until they have paid in full, have caused the closures. A spokesman from Bright House said to the BBC, "We're working to redeploy as many people as possible into alternative roles, but redundancies will be inevitable."
The generosity of Sir Paul McCartney has helped boost the good works of Ryde Rotary. the group was presented with a cheque for £1,500 thanks to the former Beatle. President Mike Jukes explained, "At Ryde Rotary's meeting at the Elfs Hotel last Tuesday, where we were presented with a cheque for local charities and good causes. Nothing unusual in that, but this cheque came as a result of the generosity of Sir Paul McCartney, and there's an interesting backstory." Phil Hancock, who presented the cheque, is a former member of Ryde Rotary and for several years in the 1960s worked as a sound engineer at the famous Abbey Road studios in London, where he met many of the top bands of the day, including the Beatles. While working with Paul McCartney, Phil was given a limited edition album that he's kept until recently. Phil found the album during a clear-out when he and his wife moved house, and it made him think about a wager he'd made with another former Ryde Rotarian, Mike Turner, now sadly deceased, to donate some money to Ryde Rotary. Phil contacted Sir Paul to tell him about his plan to auction the album and suggested the addition of a signature on the sleeve would considerably enhance its value. Sir Paul readily agreed and confirmed he would be happy for the proceeds to be distributed to charities and good causes in the Ryde area. The amount received at auction enabled Phil to present me with a cheque for £1,500, and there was sufficient further funds for Phil to make generous donations to two other charities close to his heart. I had the honour of writing a letter of thanks to Sir Paul McCartney on behalf of Ryde Rotary.
Islanders have been warned not to stockpile medication in the event of a no-deal Brexit. The government asked the NHS, suppliers and pharmaceutical companies to order 6 additional weeks' worth of medication in case supplies are disrupted. However, doctors on the island would not be allowed to write longer prescriptions for patients. UK health providers, including hospitals, care homes, GPs and community pharmacies and individuals, have been told not to stockpile medicines beyond their usual levels. The Isle of Wight NHS published a contingency report to come into effect should the UK leave the EU without a deal. The government said UK ports would wave through goods from the EU without checks to avoid huge traffic jams and to calm fears of border chaos.
The number of times grass verges on the Isle of Wight are cut could be reduced in a bid to save money and boost the island's ecosystem. The island could follow in the footsteps of Dorset County Council, which has saved almost £250,000 by reducing the number of times the grass verges are cut from 7 to 2 a year. Last summer, Dorset trialled new ways of managing verges to produce cost savings. The trials involved different methods of management to reduce the soil fertility within the verge itself and decrease grass growth. They found the approach led to roadside verges rich in delicate wildflowers, providing a valuable source of nectar for bees, butterflies and other pollinating insects. In December, Councillors Steve Hastings and John Hobart travelled to the county to meet Dr Philip Sterling and Giles Nicholson of Dorset's Green Team. A report due to go before the Scrutiny Committee last night, that's Thursday, said, "With the squeeze on public finance, we've much less money available to satisfy this demand, and with milder autumns and springs leading to extended growing seasons, there's greater public pressure on us to cut more rather than less often." In Dorset, they're taking a different approach to these problems, and they start from the principle that if they can reduce the amount of grass that grows in the first place, they'll have less to cut, and this should cost them less. As soil nutrients decrease, the number of plants that can survive increases, and it produces a more diverse ecosystem. A report by the two Isle of Wight councillors said, "This approach has also won over the public, as vast areas of verges are more colourful and visited by many more wildlife species."
A teenager who smashed a man's jaw while kicking him on the ground has been spared jail. Ashley Jones, 20 of High Street Ryde, was 19 when he attacked Josh Lewis, punching him a number of times to the face, knocking him to the ground and continuing his attack with kicks to the head. Mr Lewis lost a number of teeth and suffered a broken jaw and will now have metalwork on his jaw for the rest of his life. Jones pleaded guilty to inflicting GBH and appeared before the Isle of Wight Crown Court last Friday. Russell Pine, representing Jones, said his client believed Mr Lewis had stolen £70 from him. After the attack, Jones felt remorse and helped his victim up and said, "No hard feelings," the court heard. Recorder Marcus Pilsersdorfer sentenced Jones to 16 months in jail, suspended for 18 months, with 15 days rehabilitation activities and a 3-month curfew. He also ordered Jones to pay £1,000 compensation to Mr Lewis and £425 costs.
Hundreds of Isle of Wight patients were stranded in hospital for more than 3 weeks, new figures reveal. The Trust had almost 10 times the target number of super-stranded patients, people who spent more than 21 days in hospital. The yearly target for 2018-19 is 46, but over the year 445 people spent 3 or more weeks in hospital. At the end of December, the Trust had 45 super-stranded patients. The Trust was told by NHS England to reduce the number of patients by 26% to free up more beds. Bed space is a problem at the Trust, and in December it had more lost bed days in the space of a month, that's 123, than its target for the entire year, that's 115. In total over the year, there were 821 lost bed days. Winter bed capacity has opened up an extra 30 beds at the hospital.
An 11-year-old boy, football fan, had a day out he will never forget when he was invited to Wembley Stadium to walk out with players of his favourite team, Tottenham, on Saturday. Nicholas Gregory of Haylands Ride travelled up to Wembley with his stepfather Rob Hobbs, a lifelong Spurs fan, after he put his name forward in the junior fan club. Nicholas got to meet all the players and have a tour of the stadium before walking out onto the pitch with player Toby Alderweireld before the match. Spurs played Newcastle and won 1-0. Nicholas's mother, Jules, said it was absolutely fantastic. He had such a good time. We managed to keep it a secret and surprise him with it on Friday night. He was just in shock. He keeps saying he can't believe it. The match was aired on Sky Sports, so the rest of Nicholas's family and friends were able to watch him walk out with the players.
Luddites mourning the closure of their beloved King Lud pub might be in for a welcome surprise just around the corner. The King Lud closed its doors on January 24th and is set to return as a craft beer pub and sports bar in the near future. The Casbah in Union Street recently announced it would close too. However, interim managers of the King Lud, Ross Edgerton, and partner Kelly Wheeler, who reopened the Ride Esplanade bar and live music venue after its former tenants pulled out in autumn last year, have stepped in to rescue the Casbah too. Familiar fixtures from the Lud could be brought into the Casbah, but the owners are being cautious as to disturbing the bar's distinct identity. We have all the portholes that used to be above the bar, the sofas, blackboards, piano, and artworks from the Lud in a van. It's all safe, said Ross. If we can keep the Casbah as the Casbah, but have a bit of the Lud too, that's what we want to do. People really enjoyed what we were doing with the place, and the Lud just got busier every night we had it. We want to keep that going with the Casbah and have live music and maybe see Busker's Corner show its head again.
Plans to reorganise the Church of England parish of Newport have been given the green light by the Bishop's Council. The original proposal to merge Newport with the surrounding rural parishes has been altered following consultations, and the parishes of Arreton and Newchurch have been removed from the reorganisation plans. The new plan, which could see job losses among clergy in traditional roles, see the parishes of Newport Minster, St John's Newport, Carisbrooke and Barton forming one new team ministry, with a team rector, a team vicar and a church planting team vicar. Those 3 clergy would also be responsible for the parish of Gatcombe. The reorganisation initiative is designed to increase the spiritual impact of the Church of England, the Diocese of Portsmouth said. An investment of £9.65 million has been earmarked for areas across the diocese, including Newport. The Bishop's Council is made up of clergy and lay people who are elected by worshippers from each area of the diocese. Since October, they have sifted through hundreds of emails, letters and petitions, hosted public meetings and held around 30 other meetings with individual clergy and parochial church councils. In Gosport, Newport and the Lee Park estates, the new investment would involve appointing new pioneer ministers, operations managers, youth ministers and others to work alongside traditional parish clergy.
A new senior member of staff has been appointed to the Isle of Wight Council. Colin Rowland is the new permanent director of neighbourhoods and will look after a host of services, including waste, highways and leisure. He's worked in senior roles at a number of other local authorities, including Basingstoke and Dean, Southampton and Hampshire. Mr Rowland will work to improve both the Council's commercial service contracts and increase commercial activity and income generation.
Only £15,000 is needed for the Wessex Councillors Trust building for the future appeal to reach its £100,000 goal. It is hoped the final hurdle needed to kit out the centre will be raised by islanders, businesses and schools purchasing an item from the Wessex Wish list. Using the list, islanders can donate money for a specific item needed in the new centre. This includes soft furnishings, therapy beds and everything in between. Lorraine Wight, Community Engagement Manager, said, "With the support of the Isle of Wight community, we have managed to raise £85,000 in 9 months." Lorraine said the Wessex Wight list was a great way for the community to leave a lasting mark on the new centre they have helped create. The appeal is set to close at the end of March, and it is hoped work to create the new centre in Newport's Lugley Street will begin in May. The work will enable the charity to continue providing free services such as professional counselling and complementary therapies for islanders affected by cancer. It will also provide a new area for groups to meet, more flexible space for classes and activities, and the creation of 3 new treatment rooms.
Campaigners hoping to save the East Cowes umbrella tree say they need a £10 million insurance policy, but their insurance company has refused to provide such a high level of cover. Chris Guttridge and Bev Webster from the Friends of the Umbrella Tree had originally obtained a £5 million public liability insurance policy at a cost of £230 a year. They claimed they were told by the Isle of Wight Council it was not enough and they needed to double it to £10 million. But after sending the insurance company a council report on the fungus growing on the tree, which found the willow was potentially unsafe, they've been refused cover. The council said it had a duty to protect the public. Chris said, "We have 2 reports which contradict the council report, but we were told we have to send everything. We were and still are willing to pay whatever it costs to save our wonderful tree." Chris said the group was willing to raise the money to build a safety frame around the tree. He said, "Every time we sort something out, the council has said it's not good enough. Every time the obstacles get bigger." A council spokesperson said the authority was involved in negotiations with parties interested in taking on responsibility for the umbrella tree and was seeking information from them on a range of key issues. The spokesperson said, "These include how an organisation taking on responsibility may be constituted, public liability insurance cover, possible physical support measures for the tree, and future inspection regimes."
Further discussions have taken place before a planning application is submitted for a new affordable housing development at Taylor Road, Gunville. Members of the Sovereign Housing Association Development and Housing teams met Councillor Chris Whitehouse, Isle of Wight Council representative for Newport West, and Councillor Peter Whiteman of Newport and Carisbrooke Parish Council to discuss the plans. If developed by Sovereign, the site, formerly part of Carisbrooke College, will provide 38 2- and 3-bedroom homes for local people. Councillor Whitehouse was keen to meet the team to raise concerns about access to the new site, leading to increased traffic in the area. He said residents were deeply perturbed by the original proposal to open the new development directly into Purdy Road. "We left Sovereign management in no doubt about the road safety dangers of such a move and the opposition of the community. I'm confident our robust representations will be heeded and we can work with Sovereign to mitigate the impact of their proposal." Liz Evans, project manager for Sovereign, said, "We showed the councillors the plans for the site and talked through various options for access. As a result of the consultation held earlier this year and this discussion, we're going to explore new ways of getting in and out of the proposed development, as well as holding further meetings with the council's property services and highway teams."
Cowes Yacht Haven will be closed for events next winter and used for dry storage for boats instead. The venue hosts weddings, parties, awards evenings, decadence, and is a popular place to celebrate New Year's Eve. The management has confirmed it will be closing for events from November 2019 to March 2020. Chris Thomas, events manager, said, "Most events have been rescheduled except, of course, New Year's Eve. We've looked at how we use the building in the winter and we've decided dry storage is the way forward. It will be the first time we've offered indoor storage, and the only limit to the type of boats we can take is whether they can fit through the very large doors. Decadence could be moved to October."
Produce from an island farm has been recognised by a celebrity chef. Cheese and veal from Bridlesford Farm appeared in James Martin's new recipe book, Great British Adventure. In a recipe named Isle of Wight Double Baked Cheese Soufflé, he writes, "I used to drive past Bridlesford Lodge Farm on my trips to the island, but it's become my first stop when I arrive on the island." He also praises the milk from their Guernsey cow herd and said it made fantastic cheese, cream and butter. In a recipe for veal chops, Bridlesford Farm gets another shout out. Paul Griffin, manager at the family farm, said it's absolutely brilliant, just really exciting. We've been farming here since 1923, but about a year ago we started processing all our milk on the farm and making the cheese and butter. James Martin had heard about us and came to see us in the autumn. The Guernsey milk is luxury milk and he loved it. He seemed really impressed. The farm will also feature in James Martin's new TV show, scheduled to be shown this month.
A rescue operation was launched at an Isle of Wight pub to save a family of newborn ducklings from certain death. The 11 babies hatched last week, earlier in the year than normal, at the Crown Inn, Shorewell. Jenna Jackson and Paul Massey, who run the pub, managed to save 9 from perishing in the freezing temperatures. Equipped with nets, they spent more than 3 hours chasing them around the garden with nets. Jenna said, "We keep ducks in our garden, which has a stream bridge and an island. We feed them each day and clean up after them." The ducklings hatched on the island. One of our locals came in to tell our staff member, Karina Merry, they were running all over the place, so we had to act quickly. Normally the ducklings hatch around April and only about half survive. We have wild moorhens here who kill them, and so we decided to bring them into the warmth. The ducklings' mother didn't seem to mind as we chased them around the garden with our nets. We gathered 9, and they are now under a heat lamp eating and drinking and cuddled up together in a cardboard box. We went back the following morning but couldn't find the other 2, but we half expected that. Now the rest are safe and sound and settled at the back of the pub, where I'm sure our regulars will want to pop over and have a look at them and see how they're getting on.
The number of Isle of Wight patients being airlifted to the mainland for emergency hospital treatment has dropped significantly. A Freedom of Information request submitted to the Isle of Wight NHS Trust revealed the St Mary's Hospital helipad was used 133 times in 2018-19, compared with 232 times in 2016-17, a drop of 40%. A Trust spokesperson said there was no specific reason for the decline. During the past year, the helipad was used on average 2 to 3 times a week. In 2016-17, it was used 4 to 5 times a week. Last year, 89 patients were taken to the Queen Alexandra Hospital, Portsmouth, 42 to Southampton General, 1 to Salisbury and 1 to the Royal Marsden.
Funding for services that support disabled children on the island could be cut by £150,000. The proposal, put forward by the Isle of Wight Council's Conservative administration as it seeks to save £5.5 million during the forthcoming year, is due to go before the Crunch budget setting meeting at the end of February. The proposal includes a review and reorganisation of 2 teams, the Disabled Children's Intervention Team, DCIT, and the Resilience Around the Family Team and Early Help Coordinators. A spokesperson for the Isle of Wight Council said it was a non-statutory service, which means the authority is not legally obliged to provide it. The proposals are only a suggestion and would need to be approved by full council. The Isle of Wight Labour Party has launched a petition calling on the council to ring-fence the budget for children's services and the DCIT team. The petition states, with fewer staff and many hours cut from the already stretched service, the DCIT will struggle to provide the same quality standard of life-changing supportive interventions. Investing in an already effective service rather than cutting it makes long-term economic sense. Cuts to the DCIT team will result in the need for much more costly interventions in the long term. The Council not only has a moral and legal obligation to these families, but also an obligation to island taxpayers to consider the long-term financial implications of removing or under-resourcing these services.
The oil company planning to drill at Arreton paid a visit to the island on Monday. Visiting the Arreton drill sites, a spokesperson for UKOG said it was going full speed ahead towards the 2020 drilling campaign. UKOG said it received a warm welcome when the team visited the island, but campaigners disputed this, saying the oil company was not welcome on the Isle of Wight. As previously reported, drilling is due to begin in early 2020, but will be subject to applications to the Isle of Wight Council. The oil company is accelerating plans to drill on the island after discovering significantly more oil at Arraton than previously thought. The site at Arraton was drilled in the 1970s by British Gas, but at the time it was not economically viable to develop the site. However, with new technologies, UKOG thinks the discovery can now be exploited economically. A spokesperson for Frack-Free Isle of Wight, the campaign group against the drilling, said it is apparent through campaigning over the years, comments on Facebook and on UKOG's tweet that, landowners and those with vested interest aside, there is not a particularly friendly welcome awaiting them. We're confident far greater numbers will join us in actively opposing such an unnecessary and potentially damaging development.
A meeting to re-establish the former West Wight Community Partnership, WWCP, takes place at the Sports and Community Centre Freshwater on Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. The fundraising body for the West Wight is to be reconstituted as a charitable community interest company. The project is being led by Isle of Wight and Freshwater Parish Councillor John Medland, supported by Councillor George Cameron. Councillor Medland said the partnership was created some years ago by David and Esme Ballard. The WWCP organised fundraising, cultural events of music and talks, with the funds being donated to a different local charity each year. A CIC/charity will be capable of making serious grant funding applications rather than collecting relatively small amounts of cash in donations.
Not only were the Long Lane Christmas lights spectacular this year, they raised more money than ever before. Terry and Sue Ramplin's home, famous for its annual Christmas lights display, attracted so many visitors and donations it pulled in a whopping £5,000 for charity. The couple were proud to hand over $2,500 each to the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Air Ambulance and Daisy Chains. The couple said they would be back for Christmas 2019, their 20th year of hosting the display. It takes Terry 6 weeks to set up the display, then he stands outside every night for 4 weeks handing out sweets and making sure people notice the donation bucket. The couple wanted to thank all those who knitted tree decorations to be sold at the display.
So that concludes the first part of your talking newspaper for today. Goodbye and best wishes from Howard.
And from Pauline.
Hello, this is Madeline.
And I'm Lynn.
And we're reading the second part of the County Press. And starting with the letters. From L. Partridge in Sandown. Love your neighbour. Lord God, please protect me from my foes. They're almost as close as my 10 toes. The man next door owns a parrot bird. Doesn't like me feeding birds. Absurd. Retired builder along opposite loves watching and gossips about it. Man opposite along loves a moan. Only blamed me for my daughter's groan. The reason was she suffered bad cramp. I spoke to him and gave him some amp. All busybodies and new to road should mind their own business, not goad. Now they know they chose the wrong person. One for justice I taught a lesson. Women should always be respected. We give birth not to be neglected.
And now a letter from Catherine Williams from Bembridge. Not sure I can vote for my own village. I read Bembridge had been shortlisted for the BBC Countryfile Magazine Awards 2019, which is indeed a huge honour that will put Bembridge right on the map. Only 5 villages nationally have made it onto this shortlist. Particularly praised was its beautiful coastal setting and the lifeboat station. And this was borne out by a stunning photo of the lifeboat station and Lane End Beach taken by Sienna Anderson. What was not shown, however, was how this area now looks in the opposite direction. Right next to the indoor lifeboat station building, astonishingly, our iconic beach cafe, which included a large tea garden, beach shop and ice cream kiosk, has been demolished to make way for one enormous residence. This is not the place to go into details and planning applications. History can all be found on the Isle of Wight planning portal. But I, reluctantly, will not feel able to vote for my own village. I wonder if the country file judges were aware of this development and the demise of this cafe and erstwhile magnet for hundreds and hundreds of visitors each year.
Vital to hold council to account, from Colin Green in Cowes. I attended the Isle of Wight Council's board presentation at Medina Theatre last Wednesday. The question of social support was raised, and the leader, Councillor Dave Stewart, claims they have adequate measures in place. It's vital when our councillors believe they are fulfilling their role, and they gave a convincing pledge that we, the public, report all occurrences where they fall. The board thinks it is doing a good job. I would challenge that position. For instance, spending money chasing parent fines with huge legal costs. The floaty, Councillor Ian Ward said they were not overspent by £3.2 million. And you have to expect certain costs because it was a prototype. That was a surprise. Newport parking charges that were not thought through. It was a shame, but not a surprise. I was only one of 15 members of the public to attend, 12 last year. Many think the council has lost public confidence, so let's settle the debate critically but fairly and force a more open and considered debate. If they have done wrong, shame them, but equally praise when they get it right.
A fantasy party from Isaac Farnbank, Knighton. Mr Critchley's misinformed letter was another vindication of Labour's incompetence. Firstly, he accuses the Conservative government of living in a fantasy world. Unoriginal, bland, unrealistic. If Mr Critchley wants to see a fantasy world, he should look to his own party, which is a party harking back to a 75-year-old broken social experiment. A party so desperate it uses lies, fantasy figures, to articulate a false image as the perfect alternative. He speaks in apocalyptic terms about austerity and tries to use the emotions to overcome common sense and pragmatism. In the knowledge that through rational, frank and honest debate, the Labour Party, in its present circa 1983 form, will never honourably win a general election or the political debate. It's a simple home truth that had Labour not grotesquely overspent and instead actually implemented sensible, pragmatic, rational economic management and spared the country from the biggest peacetime deficit, the Conservatives wouldn't have had to introduce austerity. Irony of irony, though, must be Mr Critchley's laughable attempt to use tax against the Conservatives. After hearing 34 unfunded spending pledges from the Labour Party, I, nor any other Conservative, will abide listening to lecture on taxation from Labour. He seems surprised the Conservatives are not ashamed of our record. Unemployment at a 40-year low, reduced the deficit by 2/3, secured over £175 billion in tax, increased the national living wage. I can go on and on. His last whimper, Tory incompetence, will go down badly with islanders, is a sly message that Mr Critchley believes Labour are home and dry in the upcoming local elections.
Support our traders, from Councillor Charles Chapman, Ryde. I am alarmed at the Isle of Wight Council decision to veto support for Ryde Business Association. I fear the balance of occupancies of our shops is slowly tipping downwards. On June the 6th, the Bank of Santander will close, and this will be a great loss to the town. Often people who come in to visit the bank and use the cash machine will patronise other businesses in the precinct, such as clothes shops, the greengrocer, bakers and coffee shops, to name but a few. I believe we must do more to support our existing traders. I was one of the councillors who fought for the £9.2 million regeneration. As a matter of urgency, I, as others, would like to see the current regeneration team bring forward the precinct scheme to make the area more acceptable and inviting. This will encourage more business people to take up the empty shops and attract additional inward investment to our town as a whole.
Not the full story, from Alexander Hopkinson Woolley, Bembridge. Regarding school performance tables, these inadequate statistics do not take into account important factors. People come to the island to enjoy a more relaxed style of living, so the approach to work in school will be more relaxed. We need different criteria, such as happiness and cooperative spirit of pupils. Pupils feeling comfortably stretched by school lessons and activities. Pupils who leave school as better members of society, cheerful and cooperating more, enjoying work and falling into crime less. Examinations discover who are good at passing exams, not necessarily those who are going to be the most useful members of our society. I know many people on the island who have not probably shone in exams, but who are wonderful contributors to island life. They are the ones who matter, rather than those who are just good at passing exams.
Aspire meets a need that is unmet in the town. From Peter Deone, Wootton Bridge. Members of Ryde Town Council voting against an application to fund Aspire Ryde as it is a Christian organisation. It may have escaped the notice of some councillors they live in a Christian country. That country has since time immemorial been a place of refuge for the oppressed and the dispossessed of all nations and all faiths. Jews came and settled widely in the East End of London and were free to worship. Now Muslims enjoy that same freedom to practice their faith unmolested today. Our legal system is broadly Christian-based. There are a number of Christians involved at Aspire who do not feel the need to proselytise those who come seeking help. Help, incidentally, the council is unwilling to give, even when it can. The truth of the matter is, Aspire Ryde is meeting a need in the community the council has conspicuously failed to meet. The council would sooner spend money on vainglorious projects for the sake of personal credit than invest in projects meeting the needs of the community. After all, they are public servants and not our masters. One would have thought that after the floating bridge disaster, somebody's head would roll, but no. They have really lost the plot. The council members, according to the published accounts, spend more than the amount given to Aspire Ryde on stationery. When spending on sundries is more important than spending on the community, something is wrong. Another point worth considering. If Aspire Ryde were a broadly Muslim-based organisation, they wouldn't have the courage to cut the funding for fear of being discriminatory and the bad reaction in the press. In this day, Christians can be discriminated against with absolute impunity. It's time Toad and Badger chased the weasels out of the council chamber.
Why don't we invest in the Isle of Wight? From Mrs. W. Wardrop, Cowes. At an informal Isle of Wight Council Cabinet meeting with Cowes Town Council on January the 10th, Isle of Wight Council was asked, inter alia, why it had invested money in 2 sites in Manchester and Kent using money borrowed from the government, and why it had not invested in island property. Within the response, the Isle of Wight Council Deputy Leader also explained there had been one opportunity only on the island, but it did not meet the investment criteria. Of particular concern here is the fact this criteria had been set earlier by the Isle of Wight Council when agreeing the strategy. Why and how can our elected councillors have so little faith or interest in the island they represent that when agreeing a strategy criteria, it is so low that their own island does not qualify? Do our elected representatives, therefore, consider the island such a worthless and undeserving backwater? Such lack of faith on our behalf does not give local voters any reason whatsoever to re-elect them into power in the next, still all too distant, election, when it is hoped these decisions are not forgotten. Two further issues are A. The acquisition of the prison for £1 million, along with B. Section 106, money for affordable housing, emanating from the Isle of Wight Council, permitted expensive housing developments springing up all over the island. Regarding A, the prison is ready-made accommodation of cells, bedrooms for homeless people, acquired at a knockdown price. Will the Isle of Wight Council explain any reasons for such use not being seriously considered? If it is the usual health and safety reason trotted out time and again, is it really better to have people rough sleeping, especially at this time of the year, instead of being housed? If it is the running and or cost thereof, are the many social services, including Red Cross, Salvation Army and many other volunteer forces, unable or unwilling to assist in any way? Alternatively, why cannot affordable housing money be used towards this extremely needy section of the community? B. I had always understood in theory that Development S106 contributions had to be for affordable housing. It seems I am possibly not up to date, as to my amazement it appears that this money can be used for capital projects instead, such as enhancing a central open space in an island town. In no way does this resemble affordable housing, except very loosely, in that there are 2 benches within the proposed enhancement area, providing any rough sleeper with future very nice improved surroundings, along with the added convenience of nearby toilets. With very little hope of response, can we please have some explanations from our elected representatives?
Performance tables flawed. From Peter Shreve, Joint Isle of Wight Branch Secretary, National Education Union. Isle of Wight schools still underperforming. Annual publication of performance tables creates anxiety. Leaders and teachers bask in the glow of apparent success or squirm whilst considering how to handle the onslaught of recriminations. Students feel inadequate in an underperforming school and are consoled by support staff. Other students defend their school as they know staff work hard to support and nurture. We assume school performance tables are an accurate indicator of school effectiveness. They are not. The Progress 8 measure that is used to compile these tables is inherently flawed. Using a grade achieved in primary in 2 subjects is not a safe starting point against which to assess 5 years later, nor does it take into account all the complex factors that affect attainment, such as the reorganisation from a 3 to 2-tier structure, frequent school leader change, or the almost annual staffing restructures as austerity and pupil admission volatility impacts on funding. Students make progress over years, 5 secondary years and 6 primary. How much genuine stability has there been in that time? Tables can disadvantage schools in economically and socially deprived areas. Many good schools fall to the bottom simply because they serve poorer communities. There is a well-established link between child poverty and academic attainment, yet performance tables fail to reflect the hard work schools put in to try and compensate. Not all subjects or exams receive equal billing. Some receive less teaching time, although they may be more suited to the individual's needs. Others, such as the European Computer Driving Licence course, recently relegated from the tables, are examined but not taught. Government must look at the evidence, stop this misleading use of data, and move towards accountability that gives a true picture of the work and attainment of schools. Ultimately, our local schools need to work together. Older staff will remember collaboration on the island VLE, whole island training sessions, the shared education centre, and being part of a whole island education community. Perhaps a little rose-tinted, but surely better than the fragmented system we have at present.
And now, looking back, 100 years ago, on February the 8th, 1919, Ryde teachers who had previously resigned in a battle over pay with the Education Committee withdrew their resignations. The group of 22 teachers agreed to stay as the NUT representative, and the committee agreed terms. The chairman of the committee said he was pleased to see the end of the unpleasant affair. An epidemic of unauthorised strikes caused inconvenience across the country, and Isle of Wight mail and rail services were left disrupted. The county press wrote, "It is clearly the duty of every patriotic citizen to support the government in the firm attitude they have taken up in the matter."
75 years ago, on February the 5th, 1944, there was a tragic incident during Home Guard training. A live round of ammunition was put in the same box with the dummy bullets for a Browning machine gun session. When the gun was discharged, one man was killed and another seriously injured. The 100th birthday of St Paul's Church, Barton, Newport, was celebrated with several special services and social gatherings. The Bishop of Portsmouth spoke of the church's history, while the mayor and local residents remembered the parish members they had lost in the war.
50 years ago, February the 8th, 1969, plans were presented to unify the Isle of Wight and southern England tourism industries to meet the rapid changes in tourism. Mr R. Derry said Isle of Wight holiday workers had tremendous goodwill and prestige, and the pairing would merge the Isle of Wight's unique assets with the mainland holidaymakers' resources. Unexpected heavy snow created difficulties for islanders. Roads became icebound and bus services were suspended through Ventnor, Bonchurch and the south coast of the Isle of Wight. In Bath Road, Upper Ventnor, an electric milk delivery float slid backwards down the steep slope and overturned several times.
25 years ago, on February the 11th, 1994, the Isle of Wight's economy received a welcome boost when the Rural Development Commission approved a £1 million package of grant aid. The money was sent to help social, economic and community projects, including 2 tourism campaigns and the setting up of an island export centre. A Gurnard couple who were teenage sweethearts but married in 1993 after being apart for nearly 60 years were in line to be named as Britain's most romantic couple. Tony and Mary Moulding were featured on BBC's Good Morning as part of the show's competition. They had dated for 4 years in the 1940s before splitting, both marrying and then meeting again.
10 years ago, February the 6th, 2009, youth clubs on the island feared they would face the axe under a sweeping review of youth services. Both rural and town clubs risked having to shut their doors if the council cuts went ahead. Youngsters in Knighton said they would be marooned in their villages with nothing to do if this happened. Mystery surrounded the identity of a low-flying plane which was seen and heard over the island on numerous occasions. The plane was reported flying above the towns across the Isle of Wight, but no island airports, nor Bournemouth, or Southampton, or any emergency service or military group claimed responsibility.
And now some Wight memories. Brothers in train ticket fraud trial. Alan Stroud takes a look at a historical trial held in Newport in 1889 after a railway ticket officer was accused of embezzling money from Isle of Wight Central Railway by reselling used tickets with a little help from his brother, also an employee. On a quiet afternoon in April 1889, a passenger approached the ticket office at Newport railway station. He was served by a 21-year-old, Christopher Mersel, who sold him a single ticket, number 2658, for the 6:24 p.m. train to Mill Hill Station at Cowes. On arrival there, he handed the ticket to the young porter waiting on the platform. 2 hours later, the same man, a Mr. Lawler, returned to the Newport booking office, where he was again served by Mr. Mersel, and brought a ticket for the 8:47 p.m. to Mill Hill. Remarkably, it was also numbered 2658. Somehow this ticket, collected at Cowes a couple of hours before, had found its way back to the Newport booking office to be sold to him a second time. Mr. Lawler was quite sure of that for 2 reasons. Firstly, because he had taken a note of his ticket number, 2658, and secondly, he had noted it because he was a private detective hired by the Isle of Wight Central Railway to detect a fraud which they thought was being perpetrated upon them. Mr. Lawler had also noted the fact the young man who had collected his ticket at Mill Hill Station was none other than Christopher Mersel's brother, Robert. A few weeks later, Christopher appeared in court at Newport Guildhall, charged with embezzling monies. In the words of the county press, the case excited great interest and there was a large attendance of the public. Mr. Fardell, prosecuting, said the case was simple. On April the 12th, the prisoner stated by his train book that ticket 2658 for Cowes was issued at 4:15 p.m. For the 8:47 p.m. train, he said that he issued a ticket numbered 2659. But what the prisoner stated was not what had happened, insisted Mr. Fardell. Mr. Fardell cut to the chase. The prisoner's brother was stationed at Mill Hill, and it was part of his duty to collect tickets there. It was a curious fact his brother came back to Newport by the same train as Mr. Lawler did, and on arriving at Newport, Mr. Lawler saw him walking in the direction of the booking office. Mr. Lawler returned at 8:47 p.m. and asked for a ticket to Cowes. The ticket issued to him was 2658, one of the tickets which, according to the prisoner's own entry in his train book, he had already issued for the 4:15 p.m. train. Mr. Fardell went for the kill. If Christopher Mersel was in a position to issue it again at 8:47 p.m, that ticket must have been collected at Mill Hill and brought back to Newport. How, I say, they were collected at Mill Hill by the prisoner's brother and brought back by him to Newport and reissued by the prisoner.
Christopher's brother Robert then took the stand. I don't remember if the tickets by the 4:15 p.m. train were collected at Mill Hill. I don't remember if I travelled to Newport by the 7:20 p.m. train on the day in question. I don't remember if I was in Newport that evening. Mr. Fardell tried to jog Robert's memory. Did you bring anything up from Cowes on the evening referred to? Witness: I decline to answer. The Chairman: Is it on the grounds that it may incriminate yourself that you decline to answer? Witness: It is. Herbert Simmons, traffic manager, told the court, I summoned the prisoner into my presence. I said, did your brother bring you back any tickets from Mill Hill? The prisoner said, no. I then said, did you issue 2658 over again? And the prisoner said, I have no knowledge of it. I said, you issued 2658 by the 4:15 p.m. train. This gentleman, pointing to Mr. Lawler, purchased it from you at 8:47 p.m. The prisoner said, I cannot account for it. I said he must consider himself suspended. Mr. Lamport, defending, said, there was an entire absence of anything that could suggest crime. It was said the prisoner misappropriated the sum of 9p. Had they proved it? No. So there was the evidence. Two brothers perfectly placed to commit the crime. A convenient loss of memory by one of them, coupled with the damaging admission that answering the prosecution's questions might incriminate him. The magistrates took 20 minutes to consider their verdict. Not guilty due to insufficient evidence. The courtroom erupted with cheers and loud applause. Christopher, probably as surprised by the verdict as anyone, left the court to return home an innocent man.
And another Wight memory. Guide's 1946 trip to Ireland. These pages, taken from a journal put together by guides who visited the island on a camping trip in 1946, were shared with the county press by Margaret Montrose of Carisbrooke. The guides camped in what is now Mrs. Montrose's garden at her home on Clatterford Chute. In the journal they wrote, at Yarmouth we had an open wagon waiting for us at the quay. Much fun and laughter ensued. We packed the luggage, sat the senior guides on top to form the advance party, and left the younger guides with Brown Owl to be called for. The journey, although at times precarious, was hilariously enjoyed by all, especially the sharp corners, Clatterford Chute and the water splash. During their stay on the island, the girls from the 4th Colchester Guide Group visited Freshwater Bay, Tennyson Monument, Allen Bay, Carisbrooke Castle, Ryde Beach, Godshill, Osborne House, Shanklin Chine, Ventnor St Catherine's Lighthouse and Blackgang Chine. A song was written in the journal, and this is the song. And should I leave the island now, I will return again somehow, to wander on the purple crowns and soft green turf of all its downs, the sparkling sea of purest blue, translucent green and every hue, with white-capped waves, swift graceful yachts, I wish would ever be my lot. A leafy chine with waterfalls, rocky cliffs and rough stone walls, historic castle, haunted place, a lovely isle with a smiling face. And when my travelling days are done, I will remember every one of happy hours we spent together. Companionship defies the weather.
And now, My View. A panel of columnists take it in turn to give their take on life as it is played out on the Isle of Wight. The first one by Catherine James, Sandown was, in brackets briefly, city of the future. What have Ridley Scott's neo-noir thriller Blade Runner and a hand-knitted tea cosy got in common? That's right, pedestrianisation. Watching Ride Film Club's showing of Blade Runner, the director's cut, I was struck with how, in this future Los Angeles, the majority of traffic hovered above the streets, leaving the pavements below the domain of eyeball engineers and fugitives from off-world colonies. Yeah, so far, so dystopian. But where does the tea cosy fit? And no, not on your head. On Christmas Eve, I popped into Sandown specifically to visit the wool shop, to buy a cosy as a gift for my boyfriend's vicarage capacity Brown Betty teapot. Some say the glory days of this seaside town are behind it, but let me tell you, the place was heaving. The high street was closed to traffic and people thronged in this newly accessible space. No longer having to jostle shoulder to shoulder on the narrow pavements, they'd reclaimed the streets, chatting with pals and enjoying a carnival atmosphere. I discussed this phenomenon with a veteran Sandown man. Yes, he told me, chewing on his pipe. Happens every Christmas. Back in the 1970s, because of its similarity to that of a Vietnamese prison camp, we used to call the public address system the Hanoi Tanoi. Okay? That overcast day in December showcased the merits of pedestrianisation. Nonetheless, there is quite a lot of vociferous objection from some quarters about the prospect of making even a tiny part of a single street in some island towns car-free. The arguments are usually twofold. Business owners are convinced their only customers are those who can park right outside the shop doorway. Remove that ability and the retail sky will fall in. The other camp waves the mobility trump card, suggesting pedestrianisation will create a ghetto of the able-bodied. Well, let me ask you this. How often do you get the Hollywood parking spot right outside your destination, be it a shop, your home or workplace? I thought not. In the sage words of American historian Lewis Mumford, adding highway lanes to deal with traffic congestion is like loosening your belt to cure obesity. Ergo, perhaps we need to tighten our road belts to reduce traffic congestion, the act of which, as everyone knows, would deliver astonishing health and well-being benefits, as well as potential retail uplift. My pedestrianisation utopia would take a leaf out of Oslo's book, redesignating on-street parking bays as tiny parks, cycle racks or benches. That last one regularly on the wish lists of those with limited mobility. It's not an inhuman place. There will be parking for those with accessibility needs, designated times for deliveries and access for transit, the modern word for public transport. Mobility scooterists won't have to fight for pavement room. They can cruise down the centre of the erstwhile road. The sun will always shine and everyone will doff their hat. Frankly, if Sandown can prove it works, surely Ryde, Newport and Ventnor won't want to be left behind.
And from Jim Gibbons, let's celebrate the best of rhymes. No, not poetry. Much of what passes for poetry is just prose arranged in lines that don't reach the right-hand margin. And not verse. Blank verse has rhythm, sure, but always leaves the reader unsatisfied, feeling that something is missing, like an egg without daddy's sauce. I'm talking about the real thing. Rhyme has been loved in all ages and all countries, from nursery rhymes for children to mnemonics of codes of behaviour, hints for playing whist and a way for spies to remember secret messages. The only disapprovers are some teachers who think it should be glossed over, swept under the carpet almost, and the super snobs who take the view anything popular cannot be good. Here are some of the examples to show the power of rhyme. From Noel Coward. In Bangkok at 12 o'clock they foam at the mouth and run, but mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. From Michael Flanders and Donald Swan. He slyly inveigled her up to his flat to view his collection of stamps, and he said as he hastened to put out the cat, the wine, his cigar and the lamps, "Have some Madeira, my dear." And from the incomparable, the non-pareil Victoria Wood. Shakespeare would have given his right arm to have written this. All together now. Not bleakly, not meekly, beat me on the bottom with a woman's weekly. But he was no slouch. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. From Kipling's Scalpel Sharp, the female of the species, only rarely will he squarely push the logic of the fat to its ultimate conclusion in unmitigated act. And his epitaph for a deserter: I could not look down on death, which being known, men led me to him blindfold and alone. From John Betjeman's Christmas. And girls in slacks remember Dad, and oafish louts remember Mum, and sleepless children's hearts are glad, and Christmas morning bells say, Come. Some of us remember the song about the deficiencies of the Nazi leaders, which our troops sang with gusto. It ended, Himmlers are very similar, but poor old Goebbels has no balls at all. A. Hausmann showed his dissatisfaction with the verse, The laws of God, the laws of man, he may keep who will and can. Arthur Hugh Clough's words have put new heart in multitudes. Say not the struggle naught availeth the labour, and the wounds are vain. The enemy faints not, nor faileth, and as things have been, they remain. Adam Lindsay Gordon's famous words would be memorable without rhyme, but with, Life is mostly froth and bubble, two things stand like stone, kindness in another's trouble, courage in your own. I leave you with a well-known couplet which many men of certain age just cannot speak without a false start or a catch in the voice. When you go home, tell them of us and say, For your tomorrow we gave our today. Whose words are those? Last month's quote, When I do good, is from Abraham Lincoln.
What went wrong with Floaty? The troubled floating bridge, beset with problems from the day it hit the water, could become the subject of a legal dispute. The Isle of Wight Council could pursue legal action against Burness Corlett 3 Keys, which provided the technical specification for the bridge, and said the vessel did not meet the requirements it put forward. Floating Bridge 6 launched in May 2017, but it had to be withdrawn from service after less than 48 hours after suffering an electrical fault in the middle of the river, leaving passengers stranded on board for hours and having to wade through the water. The new bridge is the latest incarnation of a 160-year-old link between Cowes and East Cowes. The chain link ferry travels across an 80-metre stretch of water and has been operated by the council for 120 years. Council leader, Councillor Dave Stewart, said the latest bridge did not fit the requirements drawn up by the council. He said, That's partly why we are having issues with it. That's my view. But that will be tested in a legal environment. The council are at the beginning of a legal process which could see the designers taken to court if mediation is unsuccessful. Councillor Stewart said, I'd like people to recognise what they did or didn't do, and appreciate the impact that had on the community. I'd like a good bridge, one that's good and reliable. I don't think it'll ever be perfect. We do recognise nothing runs perfectly all the time. In a statement, BCTQ said it was a world-leading naval architecture, marine and electrical engineering consultancy that had been established for over 60 years. During this time, BCTQ has provided technical advice on a number of similar assignments operating in the UK, it said. At the outset of the Floating Bridge 6 project, BCTQ entered into a technical consultancy agreement with the Isle of Wight Council. Under that agreement, BCTQ was required to review the existing floating bridge and provide a technical specification for a replacement. That technical specification included a broad concept of a new floating bridge, including a statement of requirements. BCTQ were also required to provide technical support to the Isle of Wight Council in a number of ways throughout the build process, all of which was discharged to a high degree of care and skill. BCTQ was not responsible for the design of the floating bridge. Moreover, BCTQ did not build it, and BCTQ does not operate it. As a consequence, it would not be appropriate for BCTQ to comment on matters relating to the design, construction, or operation of the floating bridge.
The problems that plagued the bridge cost more than £6.4 million, according to a report published in November by the Solent Local Enterprise Partnership, LEP, which funded the original £3.2 million cost of the bridge. Additional money spent on the bridge included £500,000 on remedial works and £539,000 on a replacement launch service. A barge is also required to push the bridge against the tide, costing £192 an hour. Councillor Stewart said the council would cost 3 different options to reduce the need for the push boat, including a change to the hydraulic system or installing small side thruster engines on the bridge to push against the tide. The third option is to buy our own push boat, he said. The council also considered buying a passenger launch for times when the bridge was taken out of service. Residents on both sides of the River Medina have complained about noise, particularly late at night. Councillor Stewart said the council had already reduced the noise by 10 decibels, but work continued to reduce this further. He said, "The chains are old and they are noisy because they are old. They are noisy because there is not enough insulation in the hull of the vessel to reduce that noise. So new chains with insulation will have a positive impact on the noise of the bridge. The floating bridge is under an extended warranty. If the council did try to return the bridge, it said the LEP could ask for the money back." Councillor Stewart said, "We can't just go giving it back. If you're sitting on the LEP board, what are you going to do with a floating bridge? You wouldn't accept it." When problems with the bridge first came to light, many criticised the council for taking a long time to sort out the issues, and the bridge was taken out of service for weeks at a time. Councillor Stewart said, "I'm not going to excuse the council on this. I think we could have moved quicker as the facts unfolded, but we are where we are." At the time the bridge was designed, the council was run by the Independents, led by Councillor Ian Stevens. Councillor Stewart said, "When you agree multi-million pounds into a project, you should have a proper management board overseen by members who can ask questions. The questions being asked now should have been asked then. There was no political oversight of the design, and Councillor Stevens said this was left to the officers who were the experts. Councillor Stevens said, "I don't think anything I could have done would have added any value. I don't know about other people. You rely on their professional advice." He added, "I think, even with hindsight, we could not have averted any of the issues that came to light." The Floating Bridge Stakeholders Group said 71.7% fewer pedestrians with economic potential now use the bridge, compared to 2014. This excluded commuters and only looked at passengers likely to spend money in either town. They argued the bridge would never be fit for purpose and should be scrapped and replaced entirely. In a response to the Solent LEP, they said, "The council needs to acknowledge enough is enough. Throwing more money at it is wasteful, whereas scrapping and starting again may be more economical. This will cost the taxpayer millions more either way." The number of passengers that use the bridge, whether by car or on foot, has dropped significantly since the new vessel came into action. The number of foot passengers halved in 2017 from 22,030 to 11,753. More than 26,000 cars used the crossing in June 2016, whereas only 17,374 crossed in June 2018. The stakeholders group argued the time to cross the Medina had more than doubled, at times taking more than 23 minutes. Earlier this month, the group that runs the Floaty Finder website said the bridge was running so slowly their algorithms thought it had stopped entirely. And that's all we have time for today, so it's goodbye from Madeline.
And goodbye from Lynn.
The Society News for Friday, 8th of February 2019. Tuesday, 12th of February. The swimming group are swimming at the waterside pool in Ryde. The pool is closed to the public whilst the group swims. There are male and female volunteers to help you get in and out of the pool, as well as lifeguards to ensure your safety. To join the swimming group, please call the site for Wight first to notify us of your swimming ability. You need to register with the office at Millbrook House first to be able to swim with the group. The strollers will be meeting for a stroll in Freshwater. They will meet for coffee at the End of the Line Cafe at approximately 10:45 a.m. After the stroll, lunch will be at the Sun Inn in Calbourne. Please ring the Society if you would like to join the strollers group. Laura will be at the Our Place community drop-in session at the West Wight Community Centre in Mower Place, Freshwater. Come along to say hello between 10 a.m. and 12 noon and enjoy a free cup of tea or coffee. Wednesday, 13th of February. The weekly coffee morning will be held at Millbrook House this week from 10:30 a.m. There will also be our low vision drop-in between 10 a.m. and 12 noon, a weekly event to allow you to view and try the low vision equipment we have at the Society without the need for an appointment. The book group will be meeting at Lord Louis Library on Wednesday the 13th between 2 and 3 p.m. We discuss the last month's book over tea and coffee and hand out the book for the next month. The books are available on CD or USB. Please contact Laura Jasper on 522205 for more information, or you can email members@iwsb.org.uk. Thursday, 14th of February. Laura will be at the new monthly coffee morning at the Old Smithy Coffee Shop in God's Hill between 10:30 a.m. and 11:45 a.m. Our coffee mornings are run by staff and volunteers from Site for Wight and are open to all. Refreshments including delicious fresh cakes are available to purchase direct from the coffee shop. The Thursday social group are meeting at Millbrook House. The group meets from 10:30 a.m. till 2 p.m. You can knit or just have a chat, then later in the afternoon volunteers come in and read to the group from different topics.
Other news now. Members and volunteers are invited to the Site for Wight annual general meeting, which will be held on Tuesday 26th of February at Millbrook House. Join us for refreshments from 9:30 a.m. in the activities suite, where we will be promoting new events, activities and opportunities, as well as displaying various items of low vision equipment. The formal AGM will take place in the meeting room starting at 10:30 a.m. Please send an email to members@iwsb.org.uk or telephone 522205 to advise us that you will be attending so that we know how many we're catering for. We look forward to welcoming you. This week's In Touch. Proposed changes to Charities Housing Scheme. Blind tenants' concerns over planned changes at a charitable trust. And is it right to presume that mainstream schools are the best places for visually impaired children to learn? Visually impaired tenants of a block of flats in West London, run by the Thomas Pocklington Trust, are concerned about the Trust's proposal to make changes to its housing scheme. They explain their worries, and we hear from the Trust. Is it right to presume that mainstream schools are the best places for blind and visually impaired children to learn? Conservative member of the Scottish Parliament, Liz Smith, has tabled a motion challenging that presumption. What does she want it to achieve? The presenter is Peter Wight, and the producer Lee Kumatat.
This is the BBC.
This is In Touch, the magazine programme for people like me who are blind or partially sighted. I'm Peter Wight. Thanks for downloading this week's edition. Good evening. Tonight, two contrasting takes on specialist services. Why a tenant in specialist housing for more than 40 years fears for the security of her home. And in Scotland, a move away from the idea that mainstream education is always the best option for visually impaired children. But first, residents of a block of flats in West London, Pocklington Lodge, which has always been for the exclusive use of visually impaired people, are concerned about plans for its future. The 50 flats are home to a range of blind people, many of whom have spent much of their lives there. But this letter, received by the tenants last November from the then Chief Executive Peter Corbett, caused people to question their security.
We are writing to all Pocklington Lodge tenants about our proposal to ask the Charity Commission to make a change to the scheme which sets out the charitable trusts on which Pocklington properties are held. This amendment is part of a general update of our governing documents to ensure they are up to date and enabling us to work with younger visually impaired people. Pocklington Lodge is the only property left which remains part of the functional permanent endowment of the original gift of Thomas Pocklington. This places various restrictions on Pocklington, including only being allowed to let vacant flats to people with sight loss. We are proposing that Pocklington Lodge should in future be held as part of the general permanent endowment in order to ensure its long-term sustainability, in addition to this being beneficial for accounting purposes. One technical outcome is that Pocklington would have the flexibility to let vacant flats to sighted people when vacancies arise, but we plan to keep all the flats for their existing use for the foreseeable future. This change will have no effect on the terms of your tenancy.
Well, talk of changes to terms of the trust, a recent history of closures of some of the trust's other properties, the prospect of flats being offered to people without a visual impairment in the future, and the sudden retirement of the chief executive with whom the tenants had been dealing for some years, set people wondering what was in the wind. Andrew Hodgson is chairman of the Pocklington Lodge Tenants Association.
We put up quite a protest about this. As a tenants association, we encouraged individuals to respond as well as our general response from the TA. And Peter Corbett then sent us an email saying that there had been a misunderstanding and that there was no intention of making the flats available to sighted tenants, which seemed a very strange about turn.
It is clear to me that there's been a misunderstanding, re my recent letter to you all, so I'm writing to you now to hopefully clarify it. We have no plans to let any flats at Lodge to any sighted tenants at all, ever. What we are proposing is a technical change to make this a matter of policy rather than regulation. The reason we want to do this is because it would change the classification of the building for accounting purposes, which will make it easier to access funding when needed for future major refurbishments.
You found the two letters so soon after each other saying slightly different things confusing. What did you do?
We replied again asking for clarity. But in the meantime, I'd had an approach from Peter Corbett himself, apologising for the misunderstanding and saying that he would like to reopen negotiations with the Tenants Committee, with the Tenants Association Committee, and that he would be delaying the decision about the endowment. But after that communication with him, I heard no more.
So there was a period of silence from the then Chief Executive?
From him, yes. We were getting emails, but the clarity of those emails still left a lot to be desired.
Now, Peter Corbett, who you've dealt with for some years and who also initiated the consultation with the tenants, has now retired. Have they told you what happens next? And is there a sense of perhaps a lack of continuity here?
We really no idea what's going on there at all. We've had a couple of communications from Deborah Brown, who's their head of governance, but we don't know really who is in charge or what's happening.
Jan Deakin is also a resident of Pocklington Lodge. She's lived there for 43 years.
It is a place where we aim to help one another, support one another, and I think that that is what I fear would be lost in any changes that would take place.
Is that, but you particularly referring there to the suggestion, now refuted, that sighted people might be admitted as tenants?
Yes, but we have had that assurance now that sighted people would not be admitted. But in the first communication, that was put forward as a primary reason for the change. The whole communication has been so confused and so contradictory that it makes it very difficult to actually understand whether what we're being told is what is actually going to happen in the future.
Now, Pocklington Lodge is the last supported housing scheme owned by the Thomas Pocklington Trust. How secure do you feel?
Not very secure now, because if they make the proposed change in endowment, it means that they will be in a position to sell Pocklington Lodge. Now, we have been given assurances that this isn't going to happen for the foreseeable future, and it's the for the foreseeable future that causes us concern.
And for you, what would that mean? You've already explained that you've been there for, 43 years?
Yes, and I have also grown up through the boarding school system. So for the vast majority of my life, I have lived in a community of visually impaired people, whether children, teenagers or adults. I have never lived in the community apart from with my family, and for me to try and live out in the community would be terrifying.
That was Jan Deakin, and before Jan you heard Andrew Hodgson of the Tenants Association. Simon Curtis is in charge of the Trust's properties, and he's been listening to what the residents have to say. So Simon, first of all, can you explain what changes are being proposed and why they've been put together?
Well, the change at Pocklington Lodge, as we have said, is to take it from a functional property into part of our investment portfolio. The reason for doing this is that it allows the property to be held in our accounts at full market value rather than at an historic value subject to depreciation. This will improve the balance sheet of the trust. Due to the way that we are allowed to spend our funds, it will increase the funds that we have available to support blind and partially sighted people.
And why now? Because you've had these properties for some time, and this has been the position for a very long time.
It's part of a review of the scheme that is by which the charity has to perform and is held by the Charity Commission. And we've looked at that and thought this was an opportunity to change that and to increase the funds that we would have available to undertake our work with blind people.
But, is money really so much of an issue? We've been told in previous interviews where we've been talking about selling other specialist accommodation, we've been told it's never about money. I think you've got an endowment of over £150 million.
We do have a substantial endowment of that order. It's not about money as such, but this change in how the Pocklington Lodge is treated for our accounts will allow us to just release more funds to do our work with blind people, and has been made very clear in all the communication we've made.
Isn't your work with blind people really about providing accommodation? That's always been what your traditional role has been.
That has been our traditional role in part, but it's not necessarily what we think now is the best way of spending our resources. We found that when we had the 5 housing centres that we did have, we were using a lot of our resources to support some people, but not very effectively. And that's why we have moved on from that to widen our work in many different ways.
But then you can see from what you've said why the residents of Pocklington Lodge should be worried, because the feeling is that actually you're trying to get out of property altogether, and you have got rid of properties in various ways over the last 5 years.
We have, but we have given repeated assurances in this consultation phase that we have no plans to change how Pocklington Lodge is owned. It will still be owned by the Thomas Pocklington Trust. It will still be managed on behalf of the Pocklington Trust, and it will still be let and used for visually impaired people.
The Trust has announced the retirement of its chief executive, Peter Corbett, who originally communicated with tenants about this. Will a new chief executive be pursuing the same policy?
I don't know. That would be up to him or her when they're appointed.
But that's another reason why people might be concerned, in the sense that they got their assurances from him.
Well, I think all the outcome of the consultation has been reported to the trustees. They will consider it very carefully, I'm sure, and they will respond to the tenants then. And they perhaps will no doubt take into account the current situation where we have an interim chief executive and what impact that may have on their decision.
Can I just ask you about one very specific issue that people were talked about there, the residents? They're worried that flats will be let to sighted people, even with your assurances that will never happen, with the Trust's assurances. Why a change of terms which specifies that possibility? Will it be specified, for example, in the revised charitable objectives, that it will be held for the sole use of visually impaired tenants?
I don't think it will be specified in that way. I mean, in fact, the existing scheme, the terms on which we operate, already does provide that we could let to sighted people. And this is not the purpose of the change, as we've stated.
Could you make the change to these terms without being specific about making them open to sighted people? I think a lot of people wonder why that should make such a difference.
Well, it's not what we've said in that original consultation. It's the technical outcome. We wanted to be very open with the tenants. It is not the reason why we're making the change. The change is to allow us to support more people with visual impairments, but it is one of the technical outcomes that we're given an assurance that although there is that flexibility for us to let in that way, we have absolutely no plans to do so, and we will continue to let flats to visually impaired people.
Isn't this really about inflating its real value on its balance sheet, which, you know, it's a financial device, isn't it?
Well, it's not inflating its value, it's putting it at its current market value. And then the whole purpose is that having a stronger balance sheet allows us to release funds to support visually impaired people. That is the purpose of the charity.
But its value will be lower if it's only for visually impaired people, because that places almost a kind of covenant on it, doesn't it?
No, it's not. That's not the basis of the value.
If it has terms which might be considered onerous on it, in other words, it's open to certain people, won't that have an effect on the value?
Well, I think if you were to limit it, that's not what's specified and that's not how it is valued. It is valued on the basis of the current tenancies that we have, but it is just the way that it can now be valued. If this basis is changed to its market value rather than historic value, that increases our asset sheet and allows us to release funds to support visually impaired people. I think that seems a good thing for us to do.
Simon Curtis of the Pocklington Trust. Now, for the best part of 40 years, there's been a growing presumption in UK education policy that the teaching of visually impaired children should take place in the mainstream wherever possible. But now in Scotland, a motion has been proposed which would modify the presumption that mainstream education is always the favoured option. The motion has been introduced by Conservative MSP Liz Smith. She told me what had prompted it.
Overall in Scotland, we've seen a huge rise in the number of youngsters who have got additional support needs, including visual impairment. And yet I don't think that the school system is coping terribly well with many of these needs. And we have a lack of appropriate staff in some of the issues. So there were several things, but I was delighted to get parliamentary support across the chamber for this.
What are the elements that mean they're not getting the level of support they need?
I think one of the things in Scotland, when we had the additional support for learning legislation that went through the Scottish Parliament in 2000, 2009. One of the great successes of that is that we're much better at identifying youngsters who do have difficulty. But as a result of the increase in demand for services, I don't think the supply of places in schools has kept up with that. And mainstream schooling is not entirely appropriate for youngsters who have, particular difficulties. And that includes a lot of youngsters who have visual impairments.
There are figures which say that the numbers of qualified teachers of visually impaired people have dropped in recent years, at the same time that the numbers of people who need assistance in that way have gone up. In the case of visually impaired pupils, almost doubled.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct. And in fact, it's not just visual impairment. This has happened in several other aspects of disability. It's a massive concern. And I think the other part of my debate last week was very much concentrating on the fact that we have specialist schools in Scotland, including the Royal Blind School and Donaldson's Hospital, which used to be for the deaf. There are places within these specialist units and they're not being fully used. So that there's an issue about local authorities' preparedness to send youngsters to special schools. And obviously there's a very big demand amongst parents of the pupils who are affected who want to have specialist education. So, I think this is a very important issue.
And why is that happening? Is it purely about money?
Yes, I think it's largely about money. I think obviously it's a very difficult environment from an economic perspective, and a lot of councils in Scotland finding it very difficult to come up with the necessary funds and resources. But as you said earlier, it's about specialist teaching. I think we have very high standards to which we're aspiring in terms of looking after the individual needs of youngsters, no matter what their different needs actually are. And I think given the increase in the number of pupils with additional support needs and how much better we've come into diagnosing some of these, I think this is a runaway train at the moment, and it's making it very difficult for these children to be looked after in the way that we would want.
There's quite a lot of energetic campaigning going on from special schools. Is there an element here of special schools perhaps trying to fill their places because they're struggling to keep their roles up? I mean, the Royal Blind School in Edinburgh says it has the capacity to take twice the number of children it has at the moment.
That's absolutely right. And I think there's a frustration there that they feel that they've got these, in many cases, world-class facilities and teaching staff who are able to deliver excellence to these youngsters, and yet they don't have full capacity. And my point last week was to say that, there's a bit of a mismatch here, because we've got some local authorities who seem very reluctant to send youngsters for that specialist help. And therefore, mainstream classrooms in many cases are extremely full, when some of these pupils could be better cared for in specialist education.
So how will your motion ensure that the right child goes to the right school?
Well, I think that's a very important question. What I secured from the Cabinet Secretary John Swinney last week, and from the other parties who agreed with my motion, is that the presumption to mainstream policy will be reformed, not to remove in any way the mainstream idea, but to make sure that those children who are requiring specialist help, the guidance about where they go and where the best service is for these youngsters will change. And I think that's very important. And I think parents need to be very aware of just the relevant information and how their own child could benefit from being in a specialist forum.
Conservative Scottish Member of Parliament Liz Smith. And that's it for today. But we can tell you about a change in the way that you can contact the programme to make your comments and give us your views. You can now call 0161 836 1338. And when you do call this number, calls are charged at the standard geographic rate. Calls from mobiles may cost more. Leave us a message there and we'll get back to you. Or, as usual, you can email intouch@bbc.co.uk or visit our website, www.bbc.co.uk/intouch. That's it from me, Peter Wight, producer Lee Cumitat and the team. Goodbye.
The scaffolding news for Friday, the 8th of February 2019. Start with the Cowes area. Current scaffolds, 93 High Street Cowes, scaffold up within hoarding. The White Hart Inn, Dover Road, East Cowes. Pierview Hotel, Terminus Road, Cowes. Current hoardings at 93 High Street Cowes. Pending skips, 11 Stanley Road, Cowes.
In the Newport area, current scaffolds, Seafood Corner Unit 1, 32 High Street, Newport. Exchange House, St Cross Lane, Newport. Lloyd's Bank, St Thomas Square, Newport. The Wheatsheaf Hotel, St Thomas Square, Newport. Pending scaffolds at Clare's Accessories, 41 High Street, Newport. Barnett's, 73 High Street, Newport. Current skips, skip in conjunction with Stapler's Works at Fairmount Drive, Newport. In the Ryde area, current scaffolds, 148 to 149 High Street Ryde, Gardener's Cottage, Upper Green Road, St Helens, King Lud 2 Esplanade Ryde, 9192 High Street Ryde, Coburg's Nightclub, Union Street Ryde. Current skips at 2 Spithead Close, Seaview, Caritas Steen Road, Seaview, 13 Surrey Street Ryde. Pending mobile crane in the bus lay-by west of Fishbourne Lane, Kite Hill, Wootton. Building materials and hoardings, Car Park, Brooks Road, Bembridge.
And in the Sandown and Shanklin area, current scaffolds, Premier Inn 1 to 9 Esplanade, Sandown, the Toymaster 103 High Street, Sandown, Wilmer, Dorkin and Vermaper Cottages, Church Street, Newchurch, Brian Cook Furnishers 77 High Street, Shanklin, Trouville Hotel, that's 10 to 16 Esplanade, Sandown, the Ocean Hotel Townhouses, High Street, Sandown, Boots the Chemist 15 High Street, Sandown, Co-op Food Store 63 to 67 High Street, Sandown. Current skips are at the Co-op Store 63, 67 High Street, Sandown, and at 8 Hill Street, Sandown. Current hoardings at the Premier Inn 1 to 9 Esplanade, Sandown, and at the junction of St Boniface Road, Arthur's Hill, Shanklin.
In the Ventnor area, current scaffolds at the corner of Trinity Road and Madeira Road, Ventnor, 1 Boniface Road and into Trinity Road, Ventnor. Current skips, Seascape, St Catherine's Road, Knighton. West Wight area, current scaffolds, none at present. Vehicle crossings under construction, 51 Nelson Road, Newport, Holiday Cottage, Appleford Lane, Whitwell, New Wolverton Farm, Doctors Lane, Shorewell, 31 Garfield Road, Shanklin.